All right.
Hey, look at that.
Hello and welcome to Exodus, trans angels on the run in a fascist dystopia. Like dice through the dice tower, these are the gays of our lives. A group of therapists, educators, and spiritual leaders playing queer tabletop RPGs in order to embrace our identities, build community, and share the magic of playing queer games with queer people. Gays of Our Lives stream every other Sunday, starting at 3 p.m. Central Standard Time, usually. We will play queer games with queer characters and then talk about our experience. Want to know how to use games to build space for your queer clients? Check us out as we discuss how each game can benefit the queer communities we work with. Each season of Gays of Our Lives, we choose a theme within queerness. The theme for this season is traveling and moving through the world queer.
All right, announcements time. Uh, let's see. This Friday, just like every Friday, so Friday 5 6, Friday Night Cast will be playing Wanderhome as usual. They will continue their travels in the Haith, searching for Ollie's parents, um, and getting to explore a new place that they just landed themselves at. Tune in to find out what happens. On May 19th, 8 p.m. Eastern, is the third episode of Community Care Playing Your Part. I think it's being shortened to just Playing Your Part. Hosted by Renee and Hallie. Join them as they explore community care practices in tabletop games and adapt the mechanics for their own community care games. On May 26th, at 9:30 p.m. Eastern is the next episode of Tabletop Transformations. Menachem and Tanya are welcoming Avery Alder as their guest this month. Menachem, what do you want to say about that?
Well, I want to say that this stream and all the streams that Cast does grew out of a bunch of us in Cast saying, hey, let's play some bunch of belonging outside belonging games together.
Mm-hmm.
And Avery is one of the main architects with Benjamin Rosenbaum of the belonging outside belonging system. So we are beyond thrilled to have Avery come. I think we're going to play. I'm not sure what we're going to play yet. We haven't actually discussed that
You
for
have
sure.
another person. You have so many options of what to play.
Yes, many games we could play. And it's just we're going to talk about how games can be useful, be a tool for us to address our deep spiritual questions. Who am I? Why am I here? What makes me come alive? And such things. And really looking forward to the next show. You can catch us, you can watch our last show. You can watch our earlier shows on our YouTube channel.
Mm-hmm.
Just go to YouTube and search for Cast Gamers of two T's.
Yeah, yeah. A couple more announcements. Tags, the Therapeutic and Applied Geeking Gaming Summit is coming June 10th through 12th. All the submissions are already in, and we're picking panels, and it's going to be juicy. It's going to be wonderful. And you can still buy tickets at 2022.tagsummit.org. Tags with two G's. Tags or whatever. Tags. And that'll be a fun event. And then I did not put an announcement in for our next game, but Gays of Our Lives will be, because we had to shift our schedules a little bit, our next game will be in 3 weeks on May 22nd, and I believe we are going to be playing Our Traveling Home with a different cast. It'll be really cool to watch, so check it out. And I'm done with announcements. Nina, what do you got to tell us about Exodus?
Well, just a reminder, this will be the last time I get to share this with you. Exodus, which we have been playing and have finally completed this particular run of, is designed by Erica Shepard, We'll drop a link to that. It is explicitly an homage to and interpretation of the Transangelic Exodus album by Ezra Furman. And you can buy the album online. We will drop a link to that as well. And you can find Ezra at her Twitter at Ezra Furman, EzraFurman, and follow her there. Highly recommend it.
Ezra
Exodus
is currently on tour.
Oh, yeah, currently on tour still, right?
And you might be able to catch her in your city.
Yeah, so definitely check that out. Who knows? They always add dates on tours as they go. So maybe if you missed one, they'll come back or be close. Exodus is a role-playing story game about being on the run in a society that has turned against you. It's a story of angels on the road, making community as they go, and trying to find somewhere better. Aren't we all? It's a game rooted in a time, an autobiography, and a plan, and a dream, and a fear, all rolled into one. Exodus is a GM full or GM-less game, depending on how you look at your glass of gaming. And it is based on Avery Alder and Benjamin Rosenbaum's Belonging Outside Belonging system. So, we just mentioned them a moment ago. Might want to check out that other stream to find out more. And this game is usually for 2 to 4 players and usually takes 3 to 4 hours to play a session. However, you have very much witnessed us spread that out into how many sessions did we play?
6.
Does anyone? 6. So 6 sessions of 3 to 4 hours of play, which sometimes, I don't know, to me, sometimes it feels like it still wasn't quite enough. But we'll find out more about how everybody felt about it in just a moment. And today, since we wrapped up the last time that we played, we are going to be doing our debrief. And this is my first debrief, so I'm excited about it and excited to kind of hear everybody's reflections and to some of the questions that we asked. We came up with together. And I guess if anyone's watching and has questions, are they welcome to?
They can pop
Sure.
them in, and then we get to them at some point in the conversation.
Yeah, so just toss those in the chat, and someone else will let us know.
And we're not doing our regular ritual today because 1, we're not playing, and 2, we're going to be answering questions the whole time.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah.
So
as ourselves, or preferencing as our characters, I suppose.
Mostly talking about our characters and ourselves.
It's nice to just be yourself every once in a while. Even when you're with a group of role players.
Where do we want to start?
We
want to go into the questions, talk about just what highlights come to mind from the game. We want to dive right into our questions.
Yeah, it's been such a crazy kind of run. It feels like that summer at camp that I'm like trying to remember all the good moments, but sometimes I just remember the feel.
Let's start answering questions, and the highlights will come through naturally then.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So, I don't know, did any of the questions that we put into the document really grab any of you?
One looks like a good place to start because you start most games with character creation.
Okay. Yeah.
So why did you choose this playbook? Why did you play the character you played?
It looks like there's some pensiveness going on, so I'll let that happen for others. Because for me, it was pretty straightforward. I chose the Traveler because I felt like in my life I was doing a lot of traveling and transitioning. You can see me and Lara are both having new backgrounds. Snoopy has traveled. We have traveled to a new house, and I am still on my way to traveling to a new career that's much more self propelled, more entrepreneurship style. And so I wanted to kind of have a place that might help me process some of the stuff that I was going through in all of these transitions.
So did it?
I think so, but I think that like it was more of a release where I got to like I was also traveling in the game, but I didn't, because it wasn't a real experience happening around me, I could explore this idea of transitioning without the pressure that was coming with the real life version of it. So, you know, I think it was a good reminder that transitioning and road trip, and whether realistic or metaphorical, can be fun. Um, whether it's with friends or family ah, or if people are spam calling you and you didn't put your phone on silent. There we go.
It would have been great if it was someone in your chosen or birth family was calling you right now.
Yeah.
Somebody calling me to call me out about something from the family road trip we took when I was like 6 or 7.
Or just to say hello.
Or to say hello.
I think for me it was interesting. I mentioned this when we first did character creation. I was pretty solid that I was going to choose the Guardian. And then I looked at the companion PDF, and the present jumped out at me, and I was like, I don't know which one do I want to play. And I ultimately flipped a coin and picked the present. The Guardian had jumped out at me, and I think that might have been a little much for me to play. That one is based in like protecting others and protecting yourself. Do you run? That kind of thing. And as someone whose job isn't necessarily protecting others, but I do help people learn to protect themselves, I think that was a little close to home. So I'm kind of glad the coin landed on the present, which was hard for me to get into anyway. I had a hard time getting into Wheels' head for a while, but by the end, I think I really did. One thing that caught me about the present was this idea of music and how do we use music to move through the world and heal, or distract ourselves from the past or the future. And what called me about that is there was this experience after a breakup I had where I couldn't listen to music in the car anymore, on my commute back and forth. Sad songs made me sad, and happy songs made me sad. So I started listening to talk radio, and music was gone from my life for about 6 months, I think, in that way. And I'm a person who feels music, and so I thought it would be really cool to kind of get into that with the present.
And Laura, it's really interesting that you mentioned that because I totally forgot that was a big aspect of what you were going through and kind of processing. A mutual friend of ours who was my maid of honor at our wedding, and who recently finally figured out that she was queer, started dating somebody who has a music related career, and apparently had not been able to listen to music for a long time because of a previous relationship, and all of a sudden is started listening to music again, and so now I want to make the two of you talk about it.
I know some other people that have
Compare
issues
notes.
with certain music
Mhm.
that we talk about. Anyway.
um Now I feel like a good follow up would be, what, because music was such a big thing for you, what was your experience listening to the album, to Ezra Furman's Transcend uh, Exodus album?
Ooh. I didn't get through the whole album. I put it on in the car when we were driving back and forth from the house in here or our condo and the new house a bit. Um, I really enjoyed it. Uh, I don't know if I can remember any of the words to any of the songs, but I do know this. I had this feeling of like freedom on the road, and I definitely knew I was like bobbing my head to the music the whole time, and that's more of what I feel with music. So
Yeah,
yeah,
sometimes it's about the lyrics, and sometimes it's about the beat
the
and the way,
vibe you get, yeah.
yeah, how things are said, and more of the emotional aspect. Because if it was only about the lyrics, it would just be like an audiobook.
Poetry.
Mm-hmm.
Poetry. Even poetry is about cadence, though.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah.
Oh yeah. Mary Maggie.
All right, yeah. So I played the dreamer, Alex. I was also really thinking about the guardian, mostly because my whole life other people have like taken this role of protecting me, and I wanted to like switch that around and like as kind of an empowering thing. But then, so well, I was going back and forth, and I decided on the dreamer because I don't know, it just felt like they reminded me about myself in high school. And I had been thinking a lot about wishing that I had realized that I was queer in high school. Not even if I was out or not, just know in my head.
Mm-hmm.
um, and so I just wanted to kind of like go back into that mind state and like revisit things. But as I'm reflecting on the game, like and where I took Alex, a lot of the content regarding the dreamer has to do with the future. And for me, uh, thinking about the future wasn't usually like a luxury that I had. It was like, what's going to happen right now? Like making a decision between heart lung transplant or trying another heart surgery, that kind of thing. Like that was just my life, hoping to make it to the next year, not the next decade or not adulthood. It was just here. And so allowing myself to like dream and be in the future also felt really great. And I wrapped in the angel of death ultimately because I don't want to be scared of death. And I never really was when I was little and growing up, even though I was supposed to die. So I don't know, it just wrapped all together really well for me.
I mean,
Uh,
apparently, you weren't supposed to die.
Apparently not, no.
They just thought you were supposed to.
Right.
you beat the odds.
That's right.
Um,
Hence the broken hourglass on my arm.
Mm-hmm.
nice. Um, it is interesting. I have been thinking a lot about, because we just finished watching Our Flag Means Death on HBO, and it made me like just thinking. I was just thinking about the title of the show over and over again, and they don't really touch on this in a. It's a pretty happy queers show, um, which I find interesting because one of the thoughts that came up for me is that the queer community and sort of like death and suffering and all of that um, overlaps quite a bit, especially considering the AIDS epidemic. And so, um, you know, do I guess my follow up is aside from your personal medical experience, do you also, and do other people also relate, you know, thinking about mortality um, in terms of their queerness?
I definitely think that, like you touched on a really good example. So I think it depends on kind of your generation and what you particularly grew up with. Like a lot of the gay men who I know who like grew up in the 80s, like it was such a different experience and so sad. Um, and now you compare that to Gen Z, and it's just so different. And yet, I also think that like even queer people, I know it's not necessarily like generational trauma, but I think there's something there that if you know the history, like the shooting at the Pulse nightclub, like that hit queer people, even if we weren't in Florida, we didn't know anybody, but it was like knowing that's your identity.
Definitely. I think about we had a friend who goes to that club, and
Mm.
immediately called to see if she was okay the next day. And Pride was in San Francisco was like the next like week or two later, and watching
Yeah.
them have snipers up on the buildings in case anything happened was really hard. Um, and was that I think that was the year that I rode in Dykes on Bikes. Uh,
Might have been. I have a hard time
I just
remembering
remember
the
someone telling
connection.
us like, "Yeah, you should still go, but just be ready to duck." And that was hard.
It's this whole thing. I mean, it brings up this whole debate of um, so many different ways that sort of death or mortality come into queerness, whether in reality or, you know, hypothetically. We also have terms like to dead name somebody.
Hmm.
So, somebody who transitions, there's almost a death of the person that they were pushed to be until they were able to be themselves more fully. Um, and um, like death in terms of being exiled from your family or friends who may reject you for whatever identity of queerness you might embrace. And so, yeah, it was, I remember in coming out uh, that there was a lot, like, I didn't face the medical experiences that Mary or Maggie experience. Um, I think the closest thing I had at the age that I came out to experiencing something like that was the immense fear that I went through each time I came out to somebody that I hadn't already heard was positive about queer identity. So whether that was, coming out to parents or, best friends that I'd known my entire life, but we just never talked about the subject, or, family members and, um, yeah, sort of like death of relationships. Um, so I, I thought it was quite, um, a good moment. I don't know if I really explored it within the game itself, but I think that as you were talking about being death and you were processing your story, I think that it was also connecting to a lot of queer identity stuff for me. So I guess that's where my ADHD train of thought is getting to. So thank you all for being patient with me.
I worked on the streets of Chicago and in youth centers of queer and or homeless youth for like 14 years, and I'm still working to do it again. And the number of trans youth that I know who are not with us anymore, especially trans youth of color, is a heavy thought for me often. Or even youth workers, other people in the field who weren't experiencing homelessness. And I have trans family members and dear friends, and who are in much safer situations than the youth I worked with, but they still talk about, the number of trans people who were shot already this year, regardless of the color of their skin. They still think about this. And so it's really close to my life a lot of the time. I mean, I'm almost 6 feet tall, big white guy. I am wearing a kilt all the time, so I get a little, but I don't generally fear for my life. But around me, it's people talk about it.
It is. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
I was just gonna say, along with that, it's like murder and suicide, basically, those really huge topics. I am trained as a death doula, and I wanted to like specifically work with the queer community and like people dying of whether it be illness, but then also not have to worry if your death doula is going to be LGBT friendly, because like this is specifically for you. And I started doing a lot of research, and all the research was on people who are killed or people who have completed suicide. And it's just heartbreaking and so prevalent.
It's something like 40-ish% of trans people have attempted. But parents and caregivers of trans youth, the percentage goes down to like 4% for trans youth, I'm going to cry, who are supported in their families. So just work on the pronouns, work on the name they want to be called, because that feels so simple in one way and so very hard in other ways. But just that one simple fact makes it 10 times less likely.
I was just in a training yesterday on LGBTQ clients and mental health, and the numbers for all the mental illnesses and suffering, like from the regular population to the queer population, jumps dramatically. But those who have a supportive family member, for anything, it drops down so much. It's so, yeah, it's heartbreaking.
I know there are similar trends in having representation and media, which is why I think we all think that this particular stream is really important to us. And so being able to have safe spaces, I'm asked somewhat regularly, like, why do y'all, as in queer people or any other minority, need to have a separate space? Like, if you want things to get better, shouldn't it be an integrated space? And I was like, sometimes we don't want to have to explain ourselves to you.
There's room for both spaces.
Yeah. Have both. Have, a place where you can just relax and be yourself, and have a place where, you may be able to just relax and be yourself, or you may have to be a little bit on guard, or, be ready to take on your educator role because you do want people to understand, even though it shouldn't be your responsibility to educate people. I think also related to that is one of my sort of biggest, in studying queer history and protest, one of my sort of one of the most powerful slogans that was often used is so there's silence equals death, and there's silence equals violence. And so, that's the phrase that I think is most relevant to a lot of things in my life where I've been told, like, oh, you can be queer, just stop flaunting it, That's like what? Like showing my wedding pictures is because, no straight person ever flaunts their wedding pictures everywhere. Um,
Or mentions their spouse, like, oh, my wife.
yeah,
Mhm.
Yeah.
yeah. In a gender specific way.
Yeah.
Uh, and so, but it's also something that I think, as an ADHD person, I understand that I can be very WYSIWYG, like what you see is what you get. So the unspoken, invisible stuff fascinates me because I forget about it all the time. So it's something that I think we need a reminder of. So I'm glad we're all talking about stuff.
I'll answer the question in a second, but it just struck me that Alex's journey is kind of like a trans person having a supportive family,
Mhm.
right? Went from not quite
Yeah.
knowing who you were. I mean, you're not that your Alex's family of origin wasn't supportive. We don't know much about them, but when you found your family of angels, you remembered, realized who you were,
Mhm.
and
Yeah,
came
like
into the
all
fullness of
came.
Who
self.
you
Yeah.
were the whole time too.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Right.
Mhm.
Yeah.
and that you had kind of intentionally hidden that away,
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
many trans people report, right?
Mhm.
And that the hiding it away was creating a space where you didn't feel good.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Didn't even fully like take care of myself or
Mm-hmm.
Alex. Yeah.
Yeah. A little bit of bleed.
Yeah. A little bit.
It's okay.
I
We've
picked
got lots of band-aids.
The Lover
Mhm.
and named Lover because I think a lot about, I've been thinking about for several years, last few years, and more intensely, love in my life, allowing myself to be more expressive in love and tell my friends I love them and my family I love them. And also, you know, I'm married, and it would be if I had attraction to someone else, I feel like it was a problem, right? Or bad about it. But I said, well, I'm just going to celebrate all the love I feel in all these different ways. And I'm much more peaceful now about myself because I'm deciding to celebrate love and be more open and expressing in love. And so I chose the Lover because I was like, oh, someone who gets to love everybody. And that was my initial choice to play the Lover.
And I guess the other part of that question is, what did you find out? So I'm kind of curious, Menachem, what did you find out in your journey of just getting to be and playing Lover?
I think it's less I found out. I just became more expressive of my own love.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I'm also playing a big loving character in the Wander Home game that we play on Friday nights. So just to be able to, yeah, to be more effusive and expressive.
And I'm kind of like, what do you think it is that keeps us from being able to express all the love that we feel or that's inside of us? Like in your journey as Lover, what do you think are
Well, I mean, the first single word that comes to mind is fear.
Mhm.
Afraid of what the other person will think. They won't love us, that they'll
Fear of
reject us.
rejection. Mhm.
Yeah. Fear that they will love us.
Mhm.
Fear that we'll
fear
get
of
what we want.
fear of hurting someone else because of the
Yeah.
you know and sometimes it's a societal thing and sometimes it's a personal thing that love is something certain types of love need to be directed in certain ways. Oftentimes it is a society thing, but sometimes it's also just a personal thing. So
It's interesting. The training I was in yesterday, one of the takeaways was our job as a therapist to LGBT clients is to help them learn to make other people uncomfortable at the at their benefit. People are going to be uncomfortable. But sometimes I think it's even harder when it's a person that you love and person that you care about and want their love rather than a stranger. I can deal with a stranger yelling at me on the street. Just ignore them. But when it's someone that has an impact on your life, it's harder.
Even in this conversation, like I can see how love and death and like fear can come sometimes out of like that fear of death and how it's all related. And I'm really appreciative that we got to like reflect the relationship between love and death.
I really love that moment when I said something. You asked me a question about death and love. You asked Lover a question and said, love is present. I've been present at many a deathbed, which was somehow an opening thing for you to hear.
Yeah.
And that made me immediately jump to the WandaVision quote, which I know Lara's a really very big fan of. Do you want to share it?
What is grief if not love persevering?
And as much as like people like Ricky Gervais can be a little bit polarizing at times, there's the movie that was about the invention of lying and things that are I think that queerness, and I think that this road trip and fighting the oppressive societies and all of that, I think the thing that it all pushes back against is this idea that things are not black and white. Like there maybe isn't even black and white. There's just shades of gray that like go back in, and things are like marbled and blended, and so lying can be a great thing. It can be a very compassionate and loving thing as much as it can be a terrible thing. And the actions that we have in your identity can be like, you can be queer and be a terrible person. You can be straight and be a good person. It's possible. Um, but I don't know. My other thoughts aren't fully formed yet. So I'll wait for those to simmer. I do like, while we're on the subject of characters, that we each had sort of a motivating question that we were supposed to be seeking out throughout the game. And I do feel like this might be a good one if everyone's up for just like share your question, and then what answer or ambiguousness did you find through our gameplay?
I can go first.
Okay.
Alex's question was, will your destination be better than where you left? And there was definitely some ambiguity given that we didn't know like exactly, or we didn't totally talk about all of Alex's past. But I do know that Alex's destination was where they could be their authentic selves and know who they genuinely were. And I would say that would be better. Like, I always appreciate finding out like who I am authentically and getting to be that person. And it doesn't mean that loved ones weren't supportive in the past. It just means I get to live true to myself.
Yeah, I've got songs from Mulan and 98 Degrees in my head.
Yes.
Wheels' question, there's a few of them. Play to find out if the future is worth thinking about, if you can reflect on your past without falling apart, and if you can outpace both in the car. Um, I think that Wheels, the answer to all of those questions are like, yes. He tried to outpace both in the car and did for a while, until a revelation with some music in the world broke that barrier of what he was running from. Uh, I mean, I guess no. Wheels did not reflect on the past without falling apart, but was able, with help from his found family, to pull himself together again and regain his purpose and regain his family and rebirth hope into the world, which is really cool. Um, yeah, I think about that with my own like process. I am an avoidant person. I like to avoid problems, but I also am really focused on the future. I worry about the future. I'm an anxious person who wants to know all the things going on in the future. So being able to be Wheels and just like, I don't need to think about that. It's fine. I'm just going to listen to some music. It'll be great. um, I think that was kind of freeing for me, that it's okay to focus on just the future. So yeah, that's kind of what I went with Wheels.
My
So,
question. Oh, go ahead.
oh, go ahead.
Did you have a follow up for Lara?
I guess it's interesting. I'm curious your experience as Wheels. How much of the sort of music for avoidance versus like the it because it could be positive and it can also be negative. So how when you would do that in the game, like, do you have any reflections on those moments?
It's interesting, because for me, the music was a way to process things for me myself. I process things through listening, or I used to. Sometimes I do now, but there was a time where I couldn't. It was just too much and I would get flooded. Um, there's a quote about, it's like a word on the present. When I was younger, I would spend hours upon hours making the perfect playlist for my exact moods. Totally me. I would use each song as a band-aid to cover up what wound I had gained. But I used it in that to hide the wound, not heal it. The present has a chance to do that too, but we can be better than that. I'm better than that now. Um, and I think that playing and having the music, just, I'm gonna pop some earbuds in and I'm not gonna listen to you all. Y'all worry about the problems and I don't have to think about it. Um, yeah, it's a double-edged sword. You can have the negative and you push away the problems and then they become bigger and bigger and bigger until you slam the brakes on a car and get out and just start having this panic attack. Or you can use the music to move through and flow through your feelings and actually feel them and let them out. So you're right. It can be used for to better yourself or to run away from things. And I think I got Wheels to the point where he's able to use music to process.
One of the things we do is we kind of plan some of the beats and the arcs a little bit ahead of time for our streams, right? So we know where we're going. And so we knew a little bit about what the story was. And it was wonderful and fun to, in a slightly heavy-handed way, to kind of feed you the role play elements, to have that panic attack and to have the revelation and the discovery. We all got to do those little GME like things.
Yeah.
And I watched us do it and I was kind of laughing at us.
Well, and the thing that's interesting is because I hadn't gotten into Wheels mindset until maybe the last like 2 episodes we did, and I had no idea what I was going to do with Wheels until like midway through that second to last episode. And then I brought that idea up and it became the end point of our story and the culmination of our story. And that was just really interesting to do.
But it's really a beauty of safety tools and planning ahead of time, and using safety tools to plan, and this, GM full game, where the other players could, with your consent, direct the scenes, direct the role play, so you can get to the question you wanted to examine.
Yeah.
So
it does feel a lot like group therapy.
we have a bunch of professionals here.
I was trying so hard to not be the center of a story, because I am the center of several other stories on Cast Gamer streams. I was like, I've done so much processing. I just want to have fun. And then the last episode hit and I had some realizations. So yeah.
Also, Lara will tell you that the second someone decides they want to be a character that's mysterious and completely undefined, my first role as their fellow player and or their GM is to push them into scenarios where they have to reveal themselves or find a way to figure out how to avoid revealing themselves. I find it very fun. But I'm as a person, I am super open, and the way I dealt with my parents getting divorced and being at a pretty young age was just like talk about it and tell all the crazy stories that were happening in my house and like entertain people with it. And so for me, it became this point of using storytelling to empower myself in the situation that I'm in. And I think that the other thing about music that I was curious about and why I asked Lara that question was, for me, music, it's sometimes about avoidance, but I'm pretty much one of those people that's like, when I'm sad, like it's like give me the saddest, I'm gonna totally dive into that sadness until I come out the other side of it. And it reminds me a lot of when I was unemployed and trying to figure out how to be more mindful and meditate and things like that. This idea, we've been talking about skin allergies a lot lately. And I had a massive outbreak in college that was head to toe. And in order to process the itch, I had to just like, okay, I'm focusing on the part that itches the most. And I'm just going to sort of like, okay, I acknowledge that it's really itchy and this is terrible and I hate it and it's awful. And now we're going to let that itch go away. And so like sort of walking yourself through this moment like through music or mindfulness. And so I think music is a great way to kind of learn that. And it was kind of cool. I wasn't sure how you referencing music in the game was going to work with RPG, so it was very interesting. I love that we also broke out in song every once in a while because of your character.
That point about you said about not wanting to be the center. I'm looking at my character's questions, play to find out, if you can stand to be loved, how hard you can fall, and whether your heart can carry you through. And I originally started playing with thinking, oh, what does it mean to be the angel of love, whose job is to love everybody and give love? What about being loved yourself? I started thinking of that question. And then I started going to the place in this game and then wander home and maybe another game or two where I just wanted to be not the center and not have a complex story, right? Just to be there. Like, because what a joy, right? Because life is not like that. Life, we always have to process things and think about our past and, you know, how it affected us and all that. So what if I could just play characters who didn't worry about that? So I kind of took that element out of Lover and just said, okay, I'm just gonna be the angel of love. I mean, Lover is a big, loud diva of a character. So in that one way, I took up a lot of space. But I did take up a lot of space because a lot of the story wasn't revolving around me. And as a male-bodied person, I am very conscious of how much space I take up in the world, because I've seen male interruption patterns. You know, men interrupt women 45 times when the same length of time when women interrupt men 3 times. And so I pay a lot of attention to how much space I take up. And so on one hand, I was playing a big, loud character who took up space when they were on, you know, in the middle of the camera, but the story wasn't mine. And what a relief to be able to play a game where the story's not yours. You just get to be there and help and not have to process your stuff because you're just happy being you. That's that in fantasy role-playing game, right? But fantasy. But we get to live lives that we don't necessarily get to live in our daily lives.
Yeah, like my choosing the Traveler, I mentioned that same sort of topic, right? Or same pattern. And you know, I was thinking also about the questions that I had, like so for Moy, will you find a home? Will Moy find hope? What will Moy teach and learn? And I think that I probably gravitated towards the character type because, in addition to reflecting the experience I was going through in life, but being able to play it through in a different way, that the like finding a home, like I have lived entirely on my own and had that experience of kind of figuring out if I could, like, what do I need to do to make myself feel at home, without the influence of other people around me. And but also that I am a very, very social, like, group, you know, collective creature. And so the way that I find home and hope is in others, and hope particularly in both the work that I did in mentoring Alex, as well as the work that I do in real life in mentoring both younger and older people, and finding a lot of hope through the growth that I watch happen as an educator, which is a little different from the, you know, the growth that you all get to see in your different roles as well. So, you know, at first I thought of those things as very separate questions, and then at a certain point I was like, ugh, of course it's all related.
I think it's interesting that one of your questions is, will I find hope? And literally, we found hope at the end of the game.
Yeah. I was like, that's not a. I think I thought I was going to answer that in a much more vague way, but the way that we told our story, it was a pretty solid, like, yeah, no, we literally found hope. And, you know, death led to rebirth, and, you know, all of our different qualities like intertwined together to create like um, Exodus Part 2, which will never live up to our expectations. So we'll just we'll make it in our minds. Um, yeah. But yeah, so I learned that I think I was aware of that I was doing this, but I don't think I was as like conscientiously aware that I was finding hope for myself through mentorship. If these other people that are seeking out me for help are able to progress and find hope, then that makes me feel like there's hope out there for myself as well. Yeah. And then, as in terms of the home thing and the social thing, I do want to toss in my stepdad, who has passed away, was famous for saying it's not where you are, it's who you're with. And so that's a thing that I often reiterate at various trying times in my life is, who am I with, and are they the people that it's like, I guess it's like the Marie Kondo of people.
Do they bring you
Are
joy?
are these people bringing joy into my life and goodness and healthiness and happiness? And if not, change your situation, and if so, keep sticking around. So far, Lara and I have not run away from each other, so we're good. Yes, that's much applause.
Mm-hmm.
I'm kind of curious, like, I guess we all did kind of talk about it, our questions for our characters in terms of ourselves as well, a little bit. And we've talked a fair amount about, how is your character like or unlike you. It just kind of has come up in conversation, I think. And so I like the question, how did the game affect your sense of queer identity, either in terms of thinking about it for others or your personal queer identity? And or did it even do that at all? Is your perception of queer identity or your own queer identity the same as it ever was? I'm gonna see how many different lyrics I can toss in there secretly.
I mean, briefly, I really didn't find myself thinking too much about my queer identity playing this character. Not sure why. I guess I was just having lots of fun with role playing a diva kind of, character, that it was just, I don't think this time it had a lot of effect, but maybe as I think about it more, it'll come. But right now, at first sight, is not really.
What about in terms of polyamory?
I mean, it's interesting to think about a character who is interesting because my character's love was not necessarily their own love.
Because it was God's love.
It was the divine.
Yeah.
I was bringing the divine love through. So in that regard, it felt a little detached from my sense of what it is to love people, and love everybody.
More like
I guess it did help me also think about this idea of different kinds of love for different people.
Right, because you made it very clear that lover could be like literally a lover, or like
Baking cookies.
baking cookies or whatever you need for love.
Yeah. So maybe
Yeah,
just maybe,
literally transforming into
yeah, physically transforming sometimes, yeah, as needed.
to suit the other person's need. I came up with like the worst analogy for it, but I feel like it's entertaining. So I'm gonna share. So like lover was almost like, like a gardener watering plants, or giving it like plant food and stuff like that, as opposed to like something that's more um very much coming from within yourself, like a bird parent feeding their young. um and so I have very vivid images in my head of those compared things. Hopefully not everyone has to go through that same experience.
And
But
in one way, lover was poly, but another way, it was something really different than that.
right, yeah. I think that polyamory is also kind of it's one of the things that's part of the queer community, but also is sort of still considered on the periphery in ways.
Well, it
Um,
doesn't, because polyamory doesn't have to be queer.
Exactly.
right, like it could, yeah. Well, you could be straight and polyamorous, but if you're straight and polyamorous, do you still count as being queer? Because polyamory is not a thing that is accepted by society. It's still very much pushed into the boundaries.
Mhm.
Um, and as traditionally same-sex couples get accepted more by society, will those identities become less queer? Um, I don't know. I ask myself like these sorts of weird questions.
Well, if we want to get into discussion about what queer is and what poly is, but like queer to me
Mhm,
is a bigger life worldview.
mhm,
It's not just your behaviors or what you look, the visual. It's a whole view of not accepting the binary, not accepting the the standard definitions of what relationships and love are about.
mhm.
So even if it's perfectly acceptable to be, well, that's a good, actually maybe not. I would say even if there's no stigma around being about being same sex or bi or pansexual, people could still be queer.
And I think that is definitely the way that the community is shifting to, but I think for a lot of people that's still like that point of view is still somewhat a work in progress because of the shift from LGBT to queer as the umbrella for the community. Um,
And
and yeah. Oh, go ahead.
it can be an umbrella, but it can also be something different. Like I like to say, LGB is who you do or want to do. T is your gender, but and queer is a worldview. It can also be an umbrella term for LGBTQIA
Yeah.
plus.
It's interesting that training I went to yesterday, the presenter was talking about how he believes that in the next 20 years, the language will change again, and
Oh,
that
it's changing every
that
day.
we will stop using LGBTQ, blah, all those other. There are other acronyms that are shorter, like gender and sexual minorities, so GSM, and SOGI, which I don't. I would have to look at what exactly that, but it's the same idea that we don't have to spell out every little group in the group, and if you belong, you belong.
We are in a beautiful and messy time with the language we use. It can be very powerful, and it can also be very messy. And we're gonna find a balance place, right?
And when I'm talking to people who are interested in working with queer clients or have queer people in their lives, I talk about just accept that you're going to get it wrong for somebody, because there are generations that still use words we don't use now. And you're going to get it wrong, and just apologize and move on.
And people who can't use queer
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
because they were thrown in lockers and called a queer, you know.
And it's not even a generational thing. It could be, you know, a regional thing, a personal experience thing. I think the biggest thing that this shift with um, just trying to see if we can ask people as a whole to, hey, if I tell you the pronouns that you're using for me are not the ones that I want you to use for me, and here are the ones that I do want you to use, if that's too much to ask of you, like, how much are we actually respecting one another's wishes and sort of the ways that we want to walk through the world? Um, and so I think that it's just been, for me, in getting pronouns wrong, even as part of the community, it has been, and currently now sort of playing around with that. Um, it's been about that whole thing that I forget who said it, about helping people to help their queer clients allow other people to become uncomfortable at their
Getting
benefit.
comfortable with making other
Yeah.
people uncomfortable. Yeah.
And that there's both that and the other side of getting comfortable with being uncomfortable yourself, that a lot of people don't have experience with. I have some family members that I'm currently trying to help out with that, and I'm not trying to call out anyone in particular. If any of my family members watch this and you feel called out, that's about you. That's not me. um, but I think we could all do with practicing being okay with being uncomfortable, because what is life if not messy and uncomfortable? But also, yeah, sorry, go ahead.
And making mistakes too.
Yeah.
Like it's okay.
My dad, I've only read parts of it, but there was a book that came out that my dad really enjoyed, and I keep meaning to read the whole thing, called Mistakes Were Made But Not by Me. And so our ability to acknowledge mistakes, except for when we are responsible. And so I think it's well worth the effort to work on being uncomfortable. I do think that for myself and my sense of queer identity, in playing both like a character that was bearded and that was using more neutral pronouns, Z, them, there, even though I messed up my own pronouns the entire time I was playing.
Which is actually an experience that people go through. They have to learn to shift their own pronouns.
Yeah, and just kind of, you know, it's like trying on a new fashion and seeing if it works for you. The first time you wear it, it may not feel comfortable because it's just not what you're used to wearing. And or just, you know, being somebody who's depressed all the time, being happy might feel uncomfortable because you're so used to being depressed. And so I've been playing around a lot more with varying my pronouns. I'm less concerned about having a singular pronoun for myself and more really curious about it as a sociology experiment, I guess, is what it would fall under. Earlier, when we were talking about safety, I wanted to mention that a couple of times lately, especially because I'm still masking out in public places, I've gotten sir. Even
I
when
did
they're
the
talking,
other day, yeah.
yeah, and you know, sometimes I feel proud because I'm like, and because my anatomy is not usually associated with that term. But I also realize that I tend to feel safer when people use masculine pronouns for me. Like, especially when I get that at the hardware store, I feel like I'm going to get a little bit more respect. They think I'm a guy, even if they think I'm young. I had a weird experience at Lowe's that I never thought I would experience at a hardware store, where the clerk that I saw a couple times through the garden center, because they always have a shorter line, um, at one point was like, "What are your pronouns? Because I want to make sure I get them correct." And I was like, "Oh, Lowe's in this more conservative portion of the Bay Area. Like, I don't even get this when I'm in San Francisco." Like, it was just this very sweet moment, because I was worried when we moved or traveled or transitioned out here about, you know, will I need to sort of be a little bit in the closet about who I am, and now I'm like, nah, screw it. Like, if somebody's uncomfortable, there's enough people out here that, either specifically care or don't feel like it's worth getting all heated about. That I can just be myself. And
Well, and that gets to getting the theme of the whole season we're doing is traveling through the world queer and moving to different places where you're less accepted or more accepted.
mhm.
Yeah, that was a concern of mine too when we moved here. We live a couple blocks from a Pentecostal church.
A very big one that the building used to be a movie theater.
Yeah. And so driving by with my rainbow sticker on the back of the car makes me feel a little uncomfortable sometimes, but then also like, yeah, whatever. you know?
Yeah. Um, I think I was joking with Lara that if anybody did like come by the house or like stop us and try to talk to us about being Pentecostal, that um, I might make a probably not very nice joke for religion and place my palm upon their head and say like, "Oh my God, you've been cured. Now you are also queer." Like, kind of just the giving people a taste of their own medicine. I don't like to treat people like that in person, but sometimes the image of it can be empowering, that you're not a powerless person in response to that stuff. Um, as an
Maggie,
opposite example, I had my first doctor's appointment at a place in Concord, which is supposed to be way more liberal than where we are right now in our house. And they even, for the intake form, it's like, what's your sex assigned at birth? What's your current? And then like, what is your gender? And then what are your pronouns, which you could leave blank if you wanted to. And so I put non-binary as my gender, and I put blank for the pronouns. And so several times they kept asking me to like, "Oh, you missed filling out this portion with the pronouns." And at a certain point I was like, "Oh, I'm okay with whatever you use." And they were like, "Yeah, I know, but the front desk people, like, they don't want to make anybody unhappy." And I'm like, yeah, like in my head I'm like, yeah, that's what I'm telling you. You can use whatever you want. I'm happy with any of it. And so it was interesting that in that more liberal space, I was forced to define myself for the comfort of the reception staff that was there. Um, and so I was like, more often she or they. So I guess just put those. And yeah.
Maggie, do you have any thoughts about how this character has helped you understand your queer identity?
Yeah, I was trying to think. I guess it didn't usually feel like I was processing my queer identity, but rather like really getting a different feel on how all of my identities are so intersecting. Like if when we're groups of multiple marginalized peoples, it's like illness and queerness. Um, it, my support groups for like my heart and my condition were and are some of the unsafest places to be me, and it's heartbreaking. I want to write a book on it because it's I don't know, it's like, it was pretty devastating for me because it felt like I lost anybody who could identify with me and my brother who died. So it was really hard. But this game allowed me to like explore all of that in a way that didn't have to have queerness like right out front. Like it didn't have to necessarily be always about queerness. It could just like be a part of the story. And sometimes I think we don't get that. Like
Because
we
the
can
queerness
have
is assumed, right?
right, yeah, yep. Like we have lesbian Christmas movies now. It's about them being, coming out and being lesbians. And but like, how about just celebrating Christmas and like, there's my partner, or there's my gay brother, like whatever. It doesn't have to be
Mm-hmm.
like
About
about
coming out, yeah.
yeah, yeah. And so I loved how this game like very much has queerness and also doesn't force it to be like always the spotlight. It felt like I could process it in such a different way then.
What a joy to be able to live through a game in a world where the queerness isn't front and center, isn't an issue, isn't doesn't
Yeah.
bring fear.
Yes. That was a big part of it too, is like Alex didn't have to worry about going somewhere and being perceived in a way because of their sexuality. I think we played a little bit with that with like being angels,
Right.
but and that was interesting too. But yeah, I was thinking a lot about that monogamy.
Yeah, that's similar to my experience. Like, I don't think I really explored my queer identity through this game. Um, it's interesting because I feel like I explored more of that in like Friday night, where it's a mixed group. Still people I feel comfortable with, but that experience of like the queerness is just implied. We're queer people. We don't have to talk about queerness if we don't want to. Because in a space where it's mixed, it's expected to like, what's your queer opinion on this? Or like, how do you look at this as a queer person? Um,
Speak for all the queer trees.
exactly. Exactly. Um, it's like that thing when they have a women in comics panel, they ask everyone, what's it like being a woman working in comics? And women in comics are tired of hearing that. That kind of thing. So the queerness is implied, and I'm talking with queer people telling a queer story, inherently queer, so I can look at something else. And I wasn't planning on working on anything, really. Just exploring some of those things I talked about with why I picked the playbook. Um, and then in the last episode, I realized the story that I came up with for Wheels echoes a lot of things I deal with as a therapist, and hearing people's stories and the heaviness of it, and having only a few outlets where I can let that go, like my consultation groups and my own therapy. And it weighs on you, and you collect these stories, and sometimes they haunt you and you bring them home. Sometimes they're wonderful and healing for you as a therapist too, because you can see people healing. But the idea that Wheels ended up in a world where everything that he was hearing to bring back up to the divine was hopeless and painful and sorrow, and the music was sad, and no wonder he avoided sad music, you know? So that was a piece that I worked on for myself without even trying to go there, and didn't realize it until we were debriefing that episode. So the very end of our play.
I do think that one thing we all played with in queerness was pronouns.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm kind of curious, did you at any point behave differently because of the pronouns you chose for your character, or treat other characters differently because of the pronouns that they had chosen for the game.
I don't think so.
Hey, kitty cat. Sorry.
Yeah. I don't think so. I think for me, I treat queer people, and I'm comfortable with queer people, no matter what their pronouns are. Sometimes I have a harder time with the neo pronouns that are different, but I do my best to try and use those. I think I approach everyone with like, you get it because you're queer, but also everybody's story is different and everyone has different experiences. And so I just try to be respectful with what are their pronouns. And so Wheels was he him. That's cool. I can do that. And there was a little bit of like, he's not me, you know. So it wasn't like I was trying. In a way I was trying on pronouns, but also not, because it's not something my brain has gone to. And I'm perfectly happy with the pronouns I have now.
It was really fun to play with the idea of having a sex and gender that would just change, and to be in a body and a presentation that varied.
Literally gender fluid.
Yeah. I mean, right, from the presentation to the behavior to the physical body, everything about it was just fluid. And it was like, whoa, that's kind of fun. It was just,
Yeah. I have felt and heard so many times within the queer community, like, oh man, sometimes, some days I would love to transition, but I also want it to be reversible, and like, couldn't I just put it on kind of like clothing?
It's why everyone who is non-binary loves shapeshifters.
Yeah. I've been like,
sorry.
Yeah, even in college, we were calling it like gender fucking. I don't know if it's still used. Okay. All right. Which was like, with drag shows and all of that, I was able to start to explore gender. And this game was really fun for me with that, because I never said Alex's assigned sex at birth, and nobody ever asked. And it was just they, them, and I picked a picture that like you can't really tell. And for me, that just felt like so freeing. And I don't know if that's because, so I identify more so as gender, which is kind of non-binary in my situation, but it's like I can't separate my gender identity from my autism. And because like society defines what men and women and like all those words mean, I know like I'm perceived as feminine usually. I did shave my head for a time.
I will say your hair is very much similar at times to our old male roommate, who we sometimes call Thor.
That's so fine. My last name was Thorson growing up.
It's perfect. It's perfect.
Yes.
Well, now Thor.
Yeah. So it was really enjoyable messing around with gender.
I think that for myself, it was a lot to like keep remembering that, like, oh yeah, my character has a beard. And I think Menachem had this moment where they like were trying to kind of bring in like Menachem bringing in like your experience of having a beard, and like, I think I had to Moy had to go in disguise, and we were like, no, not the beard. So it was kind of this nice moment to remember and acknowledge again, because I'm very WYSIWYG. I did think about purchasing a beard online for the run, but it was just gonna take too long to get here. And be good enough quality. Like, I didn't want it to be like one of those really sad like Santa beards that like looks like it's sideways or whatever. And having done drag in the past, I think it's interesting to think about gender. And I had a male friend of mine when I was doing drag being like, is that what you think of men and the male gender? He's like, it's so toxically masculine. And I was like, I mean, it's like being a drag king is to the representation of the male gender as being a drag queen is of the female gender. Like, it's a gross exaggeration of society's standards for that gender as opposed to like what I think of that gender. I did notice myself getting much more into like a bro-y kind of mode that I would get when I was, in comics and around old guys, and they'd be like, "Oh, you're a lesbian, so you're close enough." And so I pulled a lot of that experience into how I would interact with Wheels because of the having he/him pronouns with Wheels. So I don't know. Yeah, I was consciously kind of playing around with that, but I'm still kind of processing what that means for, I guess, the way that I am perceived and approach people of various presented my assumption of their genders in everyday life.
Just had a realization. Can I share it?
Yes.
Please.
So this non-binary part, I think for me, it's that like people don't ask like when I'm going to have a baby, when I'm going to be pregnant, because they perceive me as AFAB, and am, because that's like one of really painful part of my life is like I can't carry a fucking kid because I'll die. So please stop bringing it up and asking me when I'm going to have a family. Like, I have a family. It doesn't look like yours. It looks like orange kittens. And I love it. So gender can represent, yeah.
Oh, yeah, sorry, go ahead, finish your gender
So can represent like so much for people. It's kind of deep.
I will say, and Lara can vouch, that I'm like, why do humans have such large children? Why can't we have like little like kitten or puppy sized creatures?
They can still grow up to be the same size.
I know. There are dogs as big as that. Anyway.
Well, if you want to read the Bible,
Yeah.
I'll tell you why. I'm not trying to be fundamentalist here, but it was actually a segue.
Yeah. Okay.
Oh.
Hey, did you see how I did that?
I see what you're doing.
Yeah, because this game is about angels.
Mm-hmm.
And it's kind of the elephant in the room in a way, right? We're not talking about the divine, about God, about religion, about spirituality so much, but particularly God. I mean, we're angels, particularly angels of divine aspects, angels of God. So how did that work for you? I mean, how did you work that with your own sense of religion and spirituality and relationship with God?
I do also find it interesting that, I think so many queer people relate to angels and stories about angels, but also at the same time have a lot of, I guess, like conflict or messiness.
Religious trauma.
Yeah.
So I can say I have like a bit of religious trauma. I was raised Wisconsin Evangelical Lutheran Synod. So like one of the most conservative Lutheran churches in the United States. So like I wanted to be a pastor when I was little, and I was directly told, you cannot do that, you are a girl. And like just like crushed in every area. Like so then I wanted to be a Buddhist monk. So
I'm gonna find someone who'll take me. Damn it.
yeah, that's right. But like I definitely grew up hating myself because I grew up in that church with that particular philosophy and had a lot of internalized homophobia to work through. And so when I first saw this game and like what it was about, I was like, I don't know if I want to play that. I don't know if I want religious themes in any way because it is not a positive experience for me. And like since I have become atheist and Buddhist, and I really embrace spirituality now and have met a lot of incredible people from all religions, like whether it be Muslim, Jewish, Christian, like, and I'm really glad that I've had those experiences. But it definitely triggers me a little bit to think about it. Even in the game, we're doing another game that has like a mega church like background. I'm like, I'm not playing that conservative pastor. No. Yeah, so I was really trying to embrace my belief of like whether it be past lives or rebirth when I play death and that like positive perspective on death. And I guess I didn't necessarily have a divine being in mind. It was more like nature and energy and just all of us being connected. And it feels like an angel, regardless of how you define that, could really still fit that.
Yeah. I think that like despite growing up Jewish and going to Sunday school pretty much every Sunday and high holy days and all that, I still grew up in a Reform Jewish synagogue that was like on its way to being Reconstructionist, which, as the quickest way to describe, is the hippies of the Jews. I'm glad you like that one. And that growing up around DC and having so many different religions represented in the area, that like for one of the years when I was in high school going to Sunday school, we basically spent it going to a different type of religious institution and learning, some of the basics and sitting in on their worship if that was all right. And it almost being like a little bit of a Rumspringer, or which I apologize if I'm mispronouncing, um, but without a deadline, and that the amount of like, I definitely am not as familiar with the Torah as I think I would like to be now, just so I would feel like I have a better understanding, not just so that I can like quote it at random when it suits me. And but I do think that the fundamentally Jewish and religious things that I inherited from that were question everything, which I think sometimes gets lost. It's a lot of the religious stuff for me. I didn't really hear a lot of any kind of religious talk regarding like man must be with woman or anything like that. Um, so my queerness never felt at odds, and ideas about angels and all of that, most of what I perceived as that lore, I perceived that lore as coming from Christianity, even though I know it's not like that anymore. Um, and so I perceived angels to be basically on level with vampires and werewolves and other, classic uh, uh, like horror and monster
Just
kind
watch
of stuff.
Supernatural.
Yeah, basically supernatural. Yeah. So so that's sort of for me like angels are to queerness the same as like X-Men are to queerness. Often tortured on some sort of journey trying to figure out what their true purpose in this world is.
Well, you made a decision to clearly bring in Moses and Zipporah.
Oh, yeah. I keep forgetting about that. But yeah, it was kind of this but then like yeah, like the Moses and Zipporah, but also they have amnesia and so they don't know they're Moses and Zipporah. Um but I think it's less about the purely religious take on that and more about the watching The Prince of Egypt every year since it came out, if not multiple times a year since it came out.
That's our Passover tradition. Yes.
And enjoying the way that that relationship was shown, that he couldn't just settle down with Zipporah forever because here is this place, this home that he has now, and yet his people still suffer. And so I think it's going to tie in actually more so to my like 10 years later when we do that. Um, but I sort of I don't I was playing around with the idea of like my character already knows who Z is, and yet there's a part of themselves that is not about queerness that they're trying to or maybe not trying to, but that might slowly be revealed. So I think just like everybody else, like kind of not intentionally making the story about being queer. Um, but I do kind of like the twist that like in this world Moses is trans or non-binary.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting. My concept of religion is a little closer to Mary's. My mom had a lot of religious trauma and decided her children were going to, she was raised Catholic, and she decided her children were going to get to choose. Um, and officially, only one of us chose and was baptized Catholic. Um, I thought of myself as pretty atheist, but I think it's a more agnostic kind of worldview. Um, I find myself feeling connected to something bigger in nature and at my summer camp. My summer camp is like my church. I go there, I can grow, I reflect. Um, it's the community there. We all support each other. And I can't just leave out. I feel like there's something there. And that's what I appreciated about. We were playing angels, and I was actually pulling from, like, real angels in stories, but we didn't define what the divine is. And that is something greater out there that this power comes from. And that I appreciated that. I don't shy away from religion as much anymore, being married to someone who's Jewish, and we practice a lot of Jewish holidays here. Um, but I also appreciated a lot of we're traveling in nature. There's these giant trees, and there's a pond with a cliff that we can jump off of, and beauty in the world, even in this dystopian fascist society. And that was really cool to feel like my sense of spirituality was pulled in as well.
So our viewers may know I'm a rabbi, and I'm not a big fan of religion. I actually think the spiritual impulse came first, the impulse to know ourselves, to know the divine, to know what makes us come alive. And religion came along and said, here's some good ways to do that, and added social pieces and other pieces. But unfortunately, religion gets in the way of that spiritual work a lot now and for a while. And my work is to help people in the spiritual growth and spiritual questing and journeying. And I don't hold to the idea of a personified anthropomorphic God, right? God is the divine, is this thing, this essence, that which binds us all together, that which is bigger than us. And to relate it to queer stuff, it says we are made b'tselem Elohim, we're made in the image of God, right? We are made of the shadow stuff of God. We're made of the substance, divine stuff. And therefore, there's no wrong person, right? If you really believe, I think I read something recently, if you really believe and you read the Bible and say we're made in the image of God, then it's a sin to be homophobic in biblical language. I don't really believe in sin either. I believe in being out of alignment, being disharmony, missing the mark. But just the idea that my sense of the divine, of God, queer people are part of that just by definition and essence, right? It's not a question. And I like what Lara said, we didn't define what God was in this game. I never thought that my angel, that lover, was serving an anthropomorphized, consciousness. It was just serving the divine essence and bringing the love that just is to people. So
I do
my
think
experience.
That, with this sort of divine essence that everyone's talking about, it does very much remind me that I think, so in addition to visiting different religious institutions, we were also taught, like, there are like a whole bunch of different ways to think about God. God is anthropomorphic. God is not, it's impossible to like define God in that way. God is active. God is, inactive, did stuff once, never came back, is, there watching over us, but won't intervene. And there's like all these different views on like how to think about divinity. And for me, I think that religion is often misunderstood in that it was this, I feel like I agree with Menachem about, spirituality and understanding that being the spark of it all. And religion became this like social contract. I'm like having a lot of Freudian slips here, trying to say the words I mean. Religion is more of a social contract that we lost sight of it being this thing that's supposed to help us coexist with one another, right? It was supposed to at times either be a way to wield power or a way to, here's a set of rules that we can all follow so that we all feel like it's like fair or whatever. The same way that we have with democracy or whatever else. And it's definitely not perfect, right? But when it becomes like an orthodox thing, or you don't have a sense of humor or doubt about it, that's when I think it often becomes destructive. And I sometimes wonder with queerness that as queerness becomes more accepted And we kind of get more of those sort of set rules out there about like, oh, here's the defined words, like here's gay, here's lesbian, here's trans, here's these words that have been around long enough that we feel like we have a pretty solid infallible, or not really infallible, but the perception maybe. How will that sort of bind us as the queer community? And we already see a ton of gatekeeping with the emergence of things like TERFs, um, you know, and, you know, trans hate within our own community. And so I see a lot of this relationship between wanting to figure ourselves out and then making everybody play by rules that don't actually work for them, as a problem that we'll have to address. And I think that's part of why, Lara, I think the guy that led the training in part said the language is going to change, because somebody is going to be like, I need to uphold the queer spirit that's behind all of this and give a big middle finger to all these definitions and toss out a whole bunch of new words that are going to make everybody uncomfortable, so that we can all just be ourselves within that uncertainty and discomfort.
I wonder if the analogy holds up that I thought of while you were talking, is that like queerness is right now about spirituality, and the danger is it'll become about orthopraxis, orthodox religion, right, and gatekeeping and such things. And our job is to make sure it doesn't.
Right.
I tell my queer clients every time that it comes up that the queer community is both the most accepting and the most unaccepting community there is at the same time.
I think some of that also might come from the constant struggle of feeling misunderstood, and then finally developing language that you feel comfortable with, and then other people coming along and, quote unquote, messing that up for you. You're like, I finally had a way to
you can't call
yourself
that. Yeah.
Like, you can't call yourself that, or or saying like, oh, you can't change the definition of the word bisexual. It's always like, which I will, I've been in this debate with myself about, how does, and as I'm approaching starting my own personal business towards storytelling, like, how much do words matter, and how much do we need to not give them a lot of power either? So I don't know. I'm really curious more about that thought that you had, if there was more about the sort of like the orthodox practice of, or fighting that, or if that was.
Well, I mean, it just came to me. So the idea is that being queer is about being our true selves, right? And finding who we are. At least for me, it is. And being able to find words for it, or to stop using the words for it, because I don't use very many words anymore. But, is to do that exploration and find that safety. And I don't want it to become, and I think none of us we're all expressing the same thing, that we don't want it to become like, well, here's your checklist for being gay. Here's your checklist for being pan. Here's your checklist for being, whatever, and make it, rigid, because we're trying to, I don't know, protect it or protect ourselves somehow, because we think it's good to help people define themselves. We want to keep being open to the freedom to discover yourself. I guess playing this, bring it back to the game, road tripping, traveling, journeying is a great metaphor for and literal way to just do self-discovery. Take yourself out of your familiar and go somewhere where the boxes aren't there, or the boxes are different.
And oh, go ahead.
So this is a kind of changing a little bit. So did you have like a direct reflection? Okay.
Or who is that for?
For you.
For you, Nina. Yeah.
Oh. Oh, your question's going in a different way. So did I have a reflection?
Yeah.
I do think that in like understanding the diversity of religion and spirituality, and how unconcrete it is, the bunch of us all being angels in different ways brought a lot of diversity from the very beginning. I also think that when we got to the sort of like the end destination, and that there was like even more ways of like being an angel than even our fairly diverse group of characters were. I think that was a good reminder, and a good visual in my head, as I was thinking about it, in terms of there are so many ways to be spiritual, and that as sort of like, I think that spirituality kind of exists whether or not we believe in it. It's kind of like atoms or whatnot, like stardust. And so it's always interesting to me that in these dystopian societies where, you know, people have given up on like ethics and religion with actual good intent, um and those sorts of things, that there's almost always this equal and opposite representation of like nature taking over, and it reminds me of like spirituality as represented in most Miyazaki films. So, I think the queerness can never be, as a rebellious spirit, can never fully be tamped out. I think, that disruptiveness of queerness will always come back into things.
The only thing I have to say on that, Nina, you said there's no one way to be religious, and I thought about there's no one way to be queer. There's no one right way to be queer. I have so many clients who are like, I'm not queer enough, or I don't belong in this space. And I'm like, this space is for you. It's for you. Yeah. There's no one way to do it.
So I just had just a couple of observations from listening to everyone in that discussion. It's like we all come from these very different backgrounds, but we all also had a very similar view of the divine and, God. It's just maybe different words, different language. I found that interesting. And then part of my deconstruction of Christianity was like really looking into like the meaning of some of the Bible verses that are used against us. And I just thought, because of trans angels, and I have heard, and I do not know how accurate this is, but I've heard that originally some of the language was more about having sex with angels rather than like man having sex with man kind of thing. So I was like, oh, playing with angels in a different way. Parts of Leviticus, I don't know if anybody here knows, but it was from Leviticus. Or non-consensual sex rather than like homosexuality.
It's interesting. A friend of mine who was a Catholic youth pastor for a while hates when people throw Leviticus at queer people, because in his view, Jesus died to absolve those sins and make them no longer valid. So he's like, you're saying that Jesus died for nothing. That's ridiculous. Like, forget all those things. That's the old ways in his mind. So there's many ways to look at things.
Yeah.
I'll have to ask him about that angel thing.
I haven't heard the angel
Yeah.
one, but now I'm curious.
Yeah.
I'll find the reference. Yeah. I
Yeah.
thought it was fascinating.
The one I've heard the most recently was this prohibition against sex with a minor.
Yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So the consensual stuff.
Yeah.
Interesting.
But we, turned it into what society was saying at the time and how to get power and all that good stuff. So,
Right. I mean, one of the things that I often have an issue with, and I think, the queer community often has an issue with Christianity in particular, partly because it's, one of the bigger religions out there, and especially in the US, one of the bigger ones that we talk about versus the queer community. Although we have GLAD out here, right? I'm thinking of the right one.
I can't
No,
remember.
I'm thinking of GLAD Media Awards. What is it?
Glide Church.
Glide, which is a massive like LGBTQ friendly church that's out here in San Francisco. Oh my God, it's so cute. Hi, Liam. Oh man, there was this other thought that I had about queerness and religion that I forgot before the cat thing happened. So
It's okay.
I want to absolve.
Yeah.
I want to absolve the cat of any wrongdoing.
She
It was
can do
important.
no
It will
wrong.
come back before we sign off.
Yeah.
But yeah, maybe it's just a sign that we've been chatting for a while, and I think these conversations could go on and on and on. So maybe we should.
We could talk
wrap
about
up.
this all day if we needed
Yeah.
to.
Maybe now you'll have to watch other shows that we have in case I remember. I'll bring it up in a future show. But otherwise, I think did anyone else have any other thoughts about sort of queerness and religion? And then otherwise, I think we all had a epilogue, right?
Epilogue for our characters. Yeah. So we're going to take a minute or two to imagine what our characters will be doing 6 months, 6 years, whatever.
However
down
long
the
in
line.
the future, yeah.
Given that some of us remember thousands of years of life, but however long it is. What was your character doing after we ended? Or what will your character do?
Oh man, I have kind of been figuring this out, and now I realize I've been watching way too much Animal Planet because the way that I was just thinking to describe it now is in the opening to the show Pitbulls and Parolees. And she's like, I do this job to help the misunderstood, the most misunderstood breed of dogs and people, parolees, and my hope is that one day I won't have to. And so I think that Moyen Zipporah will work to continue to usher hope back into the world, and continue to lead people to this place that having remembered their past selves, and then eventually when there is enough to safely carry hope onward forward, will kind of have their own eternal peace, and I just kind of see them sort of fading out into the light, or into the forest, or into the sunset, what have you.
I don't have grand plans for Wheels. I think Wheels is just happy to have his brother back and is spending time raising him and teaching him about the world and helping to make the world a little less dystopian and a little less fascist as people gain hope and might rise up against the fascist leaders of the world.
Oh, I want to make a joke that's like Moy and Zipporah become a little less Jewish and a little bit more Druish, which incorporates both role playing and Spaceballs into the mix. What?
Get back to serious.
Yeah.
You know. So for Alex, I picture them like everything's coming together, and they remember, the past, and it's almost in like the future and present all together, which makes me think of it's a Buddhist concept, 3,000 realms in a single moment. Like Alex can see that limitless potential in life, and death doesn't bring an ending to that because life is continuing, and we all, continue in our different ways. And well, at least that's Alex's belief.
I think I've realized that Lover was, while still doing their job, was rebelling. And something about death coming back, old friend, kind of got me back on track. And the question of, play to find out if you can stand to be loved is realizing in this game world that I am loved, and as the angel of love, I am, fully loved by the divine. And I think Lover really embraces that and their role and bringing love to people, but is no longer, or at least for a while, not as diva-ish about it, not as petulant and Klaus from Umbrella Academy like about it. There's more of this, like, really, even still some of the same questionable practices that other people have, letting people pay for sex or whatever it might be, because that's what some people need apparently. But it would be just more embracing the role angel of love story without being rebelling.
And I think that anytime you run into Moy on one of the trips back and forth to this place of building hope, Moy will definitely encourage the rebellion and the flamboyancy about it.
Got to be what people need. Our next game is Our Traveling Home.
Mm-hmm.
Starts May 22nd at 3 p.m. Central. Is anyone here playing?
I'm playing.
All right, so we have half of this cast joined by 3 more people, I believe.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you get to meet or re-meet some new members of Gaze of Our Lives.
Mm-hmm.
It'll be fun and exciting.
I will definitely be playing a very different character, which will be interesting. I expect to be very salty.
Moy,
Well,
Watch to find out.
Maybe I need some outside reflection to ensure this character isn't getting typecast.
If you're playing a type, that's often something to help you look at and see what it is you're exploring.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
See a theme and then talk to my therapist about it.
Good call. Good call. Many of us at Cast Gamers have talked to our therapists about the things in these streams.
And started making games about them.
Yeah.
One day you'll see some of them people. All right. I'm exhausted.
Yeah.
This has been great, though. Thank you, everybody.
Yeah.
I appreciate hearing all your thoughts, getting
Okay.
to chit chat and reflect.
Thanks for traveling with me.
Yeah.
And thank you all.
Yes.
Thank you, viewers, for traveling with us.
Everybody
Yes.
watching. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
And we'll see. Each of us will see you next time around that we're on this stream. Bye, everyone.
Stay well. Hope you all get your angel wings.